Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed our master classes today. Now, to close off the event, let's take some time for reflection with Pamela Pavliscak. Pamela was at UXLX back in 2019, and she focuses on emotionally intelligent tech, having recently authored the book on the subject. I'd like you to please welcome Pamela Pavliscak.
Hey everyone, I am so pleased to see so many people and participating in this session, and I'm feeling a little nostalgic for past conferences. I hope someday we'll have that again, but today I'm going to talk through kind of the emotional roller coaster that we've been on over this past year, really. So if you think of going back to the beginning of 2020, about this time last year, maybe you could call it the end of the before times, but the emotions have been really intense, right? First, the anxiety around the virus, almost verging on panic, and all kinds of emotional related behaviors like panic working, panic horning, pandemic shaming each other. Still a lot of this is going on, although we've settled into it. And certainly we felt in those early days, the first half maybe of 2020, this kind of sense of boredom, but also solidarity and wanting to try to be playful and fun. We maybe felt what I'd call nostalgia for things that just passed, that we just missed, like here a crowded train scene of Grand Central Station, which is something that at the time we missed right away. And now I think it's even more intense for some of us. And we had the sense of anticipating the loss of things that were going to happen. But here now we are a year later, and it's the start of something new, but the emotional register has changed and shifted a bit to the point I'm almost kind of nostalgic in some way for those early days, but we've settled in to this sense of deep sort of ennui, maybe even leading to kind of disconnection. At the same time, we're starting to feel a little more hopeful, like perhaps the end is in sight, and that might make us feel a little anxious, some of us who are a little more on the introvert side, especially, or have those tendencies sometimes, where what's it going to be like going out in the world? Is it going to be awkward? How am I going to adjust? And of course, we're dealing with actual grief, not anticipating the losses we might have. Like many of you, I think this past year, I have witnessed a baby shower on Zoom, a wedding on Zoom, and a funeral on Zoom, taking us through the entire life trajectory with technology somewhere in the middle. So if we look at kind of mapping out the human heart in that great kind of Victorian tradition, making maps of the human heart, it might look something like this. And maybe you're thinking to yourself, well, yes, I'm feeling this, but how does this apply to me, somebody who's working in product design, in technology? And I think the big way that it's probably occurred to you already is that we're living in an age even more intensely than ever, mediated by technology, and not just to purchase things, not just to make things comfortable and convenient. Yes, that's true. And we worked really hard to figure that out over the past decade. And we have lots of techniques in place and lots of systems to measure that and track that. You've heard that over the past few days with sessions on usability testing and sessions on metrics and how to manage teams. We've figured that out. But now our emotional lives, our relationships, almost everything that's important to us is mediated by technology. And the companies that you're working in or working with may be recognizing this. Over the past year, I've been doing more and more work with companies who were developing a strategy toward trust, even to the point of setting up a virtual trust exploration space to look at all the research and all the models that are out there so that they could formulate something that builds on what we already know, as some of you may have learned in day 2 on the masterclass on trust. But going beyond that, what's the emotional component of that? What goes beyond that? I've worked with tech companies on love, no less. What, not only love for a product or love for customers, but how can you model that? What kind of emotional complexity is there that we need to understand? And same goes for all these other concepts. And so I think this is something that we're going to see more and more of, and certainly is something that I'm interested in. Now, I work with companies to develop kind of creative strategies on how to approach our emotional life when it intersects with technology. I also do some experiments on my own. So maybe I thought in chat, you might want to try this. One I've been running recently just for fun is if you had a mode on your smartphone that could match to your mood and somehow have some awareness of your mood and adjust to it, no matter how that was detected or set by you, what would that be? Because we have airplane mode, don't use that much anymore. Driving mode to prevent us from, killing ourselves while texting. We have a nighttime mode so that we sleep better. But what other kind of modes could we possibly have? Think about it. So a lot of people came up with calm mode or a quiet mode. And that's certainly in this zone that we're thinking of right now, where we're really on kind of anxiety overload in a lot of cases. But I've had people submit hundreds and hundreds of modes. Homeostasis mode, which shows an avatar of yourself back to you so you can see your own mood and adjust accordingly. A doom scroll mood that will detect when it's 2 a.m. and you're scrolling through Twitter for too long. Based on one person rediscovered their old iPod Touch and discovered all this long lost music and thought that might make a good mode, a +1 mode, so you could share whatever you're doing with somebody else. So there's all this emotional potential, but sometimes we have to get at it indirectly or creatively. So sometimes I do stuff like that just to figure it out. And I'm deeply invested in our emotional design practices. So we have a limited repertoire, but we have some good techniques, right? And joy right now is so important wherever you can find it. Maybe in your home by painting a wall pink. Maybe it's in our apps and in our devices themselves. And we have a pretty good repertoire of techniques for calm. And of course, that's really important too. But there's a lot of room to grow and build on this. And then I think combined with all this, I'm really interested in this new space of machine perception and how machines could perceive something about our emotions. And I feel like this is going to maybe get a little bit of a nudge lately. It's been slow going. These developments take place over time. The technology has been around for years, still not very good in a lot of ways, which we'll talk about. But it might be getting a little nudge because a lot of the health tech uses some of the same signals as emotion tech. So you have something like Vital Signs AI, which is detecting body temperature and stress level and breath. These are all signals that could be potentially used to detect your emotion in some way. I mean, it already is by detecting stress level. You have technologies like this that may supplement what we have in airports, if and when we get back to that, or in workplaces, if and when we get back to that, that use a lot of these bodily signals that emotion tech uses to kind of translate into some idea of what's going on with us. And then, of course, there's patents. Amazon has an Alexa patent that tries to detect our health from our voice. And there's been research going on. The Mayo Clinic recently purchased one of the major players in voice AI to detect heart disease through voice. So this is an area of exploration that might be intersecting with the tech, and it relies on some or all of these same signals. Okay, maybe, but there's a lot of issues with it. And if we just look at what each major player has done over the past, say, 5 or 6 years as they've entered the scene, you can see not only the potential, but all the potential for mistakes, right? So Microsoft early days had Project Oxford. Now that's been integrated into products like Video Indexer. And you can see here that, they really didn't quite capture sad Keanu in this picture. They say Keanu's neutral. He's happier these days, so that's a good thing. But it doesn't work so well. It's determining some signals from your face, but then to translate that into a complicated emotion concept is, tricky. Apple bought Emodiant a few years back, I think 2016, and they're sort of gradually introducing some adjacent technology. So Face ID and Animoji would be in that category, because this is another problem with the technology is we're not emoting at our screens unless maybe we're talking to another human through our screens. We're not really having many emotions, emotional expressions, at least on our face, to be detected. Amazon has recognition, and this works the same way as all the other ones, trying to do some kind of facial or voice recognition, maybe text recognition too. And this brings up another problem, which is the potential bias built into these systems. Now, everyone's trying to counteract that, of course, by broadening the training, but it's still there and will be there for the time to come. And then Facebook demonstrates another potential problem with this technology is that it may be used to target or manipulate certain groups based on their emotion and vulnerabilities, inadvertently or on purpose. And then finally, we'll add Google into the mix. This is from a patent they have on an emotional search, which shows that not only would we have to be emoting to our machines, but then to detect what that means and how to adjust the search results accordingly is another big challenge. So there's a lot of big challenges ahead. Maybe the biggest one that I think is coming, and that will probably be a long time evolving, and so we can all kind of relax a little bit about some of the potentials of this, is that it's really rooted in one theory of emotion, which is based on this idea that it's biologically rooted and it's culturally universal, and that we have discrete emotions that can be detected by these physical signals. Now, I think most people working in the emotion field, and it's kind of gone through a renaissance, so you have historians, you have psychologists, you have sociologists, philosophers, neuroscientists, economists looking at emotion now in a way that they never have before. And I think most would agree that there's something to this here, but that a lot of emotion is socially constructed from our personal history, from our experience, from our culture, from our social norms and conventions, and that these systems are open and they grow and change. And that's good news for us, because then we can become more emotionally intelligent as we move through our life. So if you have a toddler in the house, they may know what anger is and stomp their feet and throw a temper tantrum on the floor. As you get older, okay, I'm totally raging, or I'm just outraged and, sort of surprised, or perhaps I'm just feeling mildly annoyed. We have more of that nuance to it as we go through our life. So think of the tech as more as like inspiration to nudge us forward toward emotionally intelligent design, rather than a design material. We probably won't be using it that much as it is right now. I think the technology is going to evolve in some new ways to reflect new theories about emotion before it's deeply embedded in our tools. But what it could do is show us some new ways, give us some new ideas to think through emotion and make that more nuanced and more satisfying for those of us who are living our lives through technology. So, okay, what I want to do for the next part of the talk is think about how we could make this shift. How can we expand what we're doing and think in this new way? And so I'm going to look at pandemic-related emotions or conditions or emotional behaviors. I'm defining that pretty broadly, and look at how we responded to that and some experiments, and then maybe distill some wisdom from that can help us. So I think the first thing is pandemic stress. So there's been lots of mood managers more than ever before. Meditation apps, emotion tracking apps, sleep apps have become incredibly popular because we want to know more about how we're feeling, and we want to know that so we can manage it and feel better. So that's been combined with a lot of perceptive AI. Limbic uses a text-based system, and this pairs you with a therapist. So your therapist asks you to keep a journal in between sessions and then share that. A lot of people sort of last minute just jot down a couple of notes, and that's fine, but it may enrich your sessions to have something like this that gives you some things to do between sessions and also can understand a little bit of that emotional content and decipher that. There are voice-based mood managers. So Maslow has a bunch of different versions propagating of itself in all kinds of experiments, a really interesting approach. But one of them is a journal that's a voice, and that can detect some emotion and also let you add your own kind of emotion markers to it as well. And then there's lots and lots of wearables that are letting you visualize your emotion, maybe even giving you a little nudge to pay attention or to feel a certain way, or maybe even communicating that to somebody else. And so I think what we're seeing here in this evolution of meditation and calm and sleep and mood managers is something that helps not only let us see our emotions in new ways, making this invisible undercurrent of emotion that's in our life, making it visible to us. And what I want you to think about is how, first of all, how many other things that we're working on might benefit from something like this, and what doesn't need this, and then how literal do we have to be with that? Because I think that's going to be a big challenge for us. Maybe we have this technology, maybe we're not even using it, but how do we design for it in a way that's respectful and meaningful and satisfying? So, okay, we have the mood managers. Next, let's go on to Zoom Gloom. Hopefully you're not feeling it right now, but I know we've all been there. And this idea that it's really hard to communicate over Zoom. I mean, heck, we're wearing masks all the time, so it's hard to convey our feelings in a mask. Now, you may know something about a genuine smile and say, oh, well, I don't really need a translator like this woman has because I can see the crinkles around her eyes and I know that's a genuine smile. But the thing is that our tech-mediated communication doesn't do so well with nonverbal. So should we do something like this and have a Zoom that registers our emotions as we go along and then tracks them and shows them? Well, this is kind of, I mean, it's making the invisible visible, but it may be making it strange for our emotions, right? Because we're not used to seeing them moment to moment. We're not used to seeing them on a graph, numbers, and it's pretty distracting while we're actually having communication to communicate that. These are all design issues that we can focus on and that we can take some cues on. So I think that's pretty inspiring. Now, some of you, if you've seen me talk before, I love Lauren McCarthy's work because she's looking at these kind of awkward moments with our relationships and thinking about how technology could help. So should technology give us a little nudge after it detects our emotion?
Hi Claire, how's
Hey,
school
Mom.
treating you?
I'm doing okay right now. I'm just kind of annoyed because there's this girl named Stacy in my yoga class who just got pregnant and she won't stop talking about it. And I just feel like she's being really...
Technology has made us more connected than ever. Shouldn't it help us get more from each other?
She just won't stop talking about her pregnancy and what yoga moves that the whole class should not do because she can't.
Us Plus gives suggestions based on speech analysis and facial expressions.
Now it's just everything is... how are you doing, Mom?
Well, actually, things haven't been all that great. I wasn't sure whether to tell you this, but
More honesty, more balance.
I feel like we're barely communicating, and sometimes it's just not the same. I try to talk to you and you don't respond, and I can't even...
I love you.
So it's really prompting us to think. I'm not sure if we want to move that far to nudging that kind of caring communication. However, the technology enables with that emotion detection some aspect of that. Crystal Knows already does that. That's a plugin for your email that says, hey, you're emailing in this one way, but Joe is more comfortable with this kind of language or this kind of tone, and adjusting it to that. And I mean, it's interesting to have these prompts. This is something that as we're developing our emotional intelligence, we may actually get adept at doing this without any intervention, but it may be that in certain cases, a design intervention like this could help. Now, I tend to be more along the lines of liking something more intuitive, expressive, maybe even whimsical to express emotion, because I think moment to moment, when we're having nonverbal communication, we're not breaking it down and saying like, oh yeah, I'm seeing she's gesturing with her hand, or she's really smiling. Instead, it's kind of an impression that we get. And so I like these efforts like Philip's effort with the dress here that gives you a sense of it without putting a percentage on it or a number or even categorizing it as one emotion or another, since we know that those are not necessarily discrete and those are only best guesses by machine perception. So that maybe can give us a way forward, is to, once we're in the zone of designing nonverbal communication, think about how we experience that and use that as a guideline, and think about how different it is in the moment versus after the fact. So say you're in a meeting, in the moment, you may be getting a certain vibe. It's kind of impressionistic and you're reacting to it, and you're not kind of stepping back and analyzing it. And then afterwards, you think about it and you think, well, okay, that was a happy event. That was sad. And so the distance changes that. And how can we work with that and adapt to that to make that nonverbal communication more intuitive and more satisfying? Okay, next condition. Now it's really getting weird. Oxytocin deprivation. We are touch deprived. Not so much because now we know the virus is airborne and it's not on our stuff so much, but we're just touch deprived with each other, and we're not getting that kind of close contact. So there exists some experiments that, right? Apple Watch, you can send a heartbeat to a loved one and get a physical sense of that person. NASA open sourced their pulse necklace right at the beginning of the pandemic, actually, that would let you feel the pulse of someone else. And of course, we have friendship lamps that are going through a resurgence of popularity. There's the Bond Touch bracelet, which lets you kind of give somebody else a little nudge during the day. There have been experiments like Cute Circuit's hug shirt around, where the shirt lets you feel a hug from somebody else. H&M has actually, in their innovation lab, has been experimenting with a jacket to do just that. I didn't have the video for this because it's a little bit not suitable for conferences, but you can check it out later in the privacy of your own home office. And then there are things like this that are just truly kind of strange. This idea actually has gone through a couple of iterations. Different research groups, they both kept the same name. I think it's supposed to be Kiss Messenger and not recall Henry Kissinger, which would kind of dampen the mood for most people, I would believe. But it sends a remote kiss back and forth when you're apart. And the idea was this was developed for long distance relationships, but could satisfy that emotional need for touch. Now, this could veer into more intimate kinds of situations like a BDSM remote tool. And obviously, when we take it that far, we can see like, okay, what can we learn from this in our emotional design? How do we design for closeness, like physical closeness? Well, I think the best of these experiments are using small gestures. They're taking a small, kind of a safe touch and putting in safety mechanisms, like with the BDSM exploration, there's a safety mechanism that lets you stop when you can. And they're trying not to be creepy. I think that's the balance that we strike with that. Okay, kind of related to that. So we've looked at our close relationships, right? How do we have more caring communication with each other when it's mediated by tech? How do we support our close relationships through touch? But we have this other thing going on right now, which is we're losing that middle layer of our friendships, and technology isn't doing much for that right now. So all those people that you used to see around at your local grocery store, in your neighborhood, even at conferences, we're losing that serendipity in our relationships. And so there have been lots of attempts to sort of like chat roulette without the creepiness. So this is a good night Zoom, matches a kid with a senior for reading a story, which is awesome. There have also been some like tech attempts to kind of sync you up. So Syncify is where you can share a podcast with someone else, and it could be someone you know, but you could also pick somebody and have like a experience with random listeners. High Fidelity is kind of another example of that lets you hear what other people who have okayed the app are listening to around you. I don't know if people are using it to really make it a thing yet, but the concept's really interesting. And if you wed that with some kind of emotion detection, which of course Spotify has patents on already to detect your emotion and then recommend music there, you've got something that potentially could be a really interesting connection with somebody who's not in your inner circle just yet, a way to develop closeness that maybe is a little bit more interesting or challenging than small talk, which we're also starved for. And then Blindly is a dating app that's been experimenting with letting you meet somebody without seeing them first. And then as you have more and more in common, letting you see. And this is a way to just kind of broaden our repertoire, broaden our relationship horizon, if you will. And of course, this could probably be connected with some kind of emotional tech too. There have been dating apps like First Blush that are not released yet, but are still experimental, that can give you a sense of an emotional connection that you have with a stranger. So obviously this has to be handled carefully. We can't design serendipity by accident, unfortunately, because we're designing it. But we could think about what makes intimacy happen between people that don't know each other that well or have kind of a casual relationship? What are those opportunities for connection? How can we create a safe haven for sharing vulnerable moments or feeling like you're okay in this interaction? And maybe, how can we be more present in each other's lives? So I think that's something that's a thought starter for me. And kind of related to this, and this is just a little one, because I only have a couple of experiments that have intrigued me here, but we've got this, say it's a new feeling of acedia, but it's actually a feeling that medieval monks had when they had this in the afternoon. It would often hit where they felt like they couldn't do anything anymore. They were just completely weighted down by fatigue and lethargy and despondency. And I think this is kind of related to serendipity, is this vicariousness. Like, how can we get that sensory charge? Not so much personal touch, but just making experience more sensory, because the screen is so flat and visual. So there's been a few interesting things that caught my attention, like Clement Gold had an experiment where he detected emotion in your tweets and made it into a cocktail of sorts that you could then drink, presumably, or student project Emoi, which is using voice detection or just an emotional setting in an app, and then creating custom chocolates. So in fact, you can eat the emotions of yourself or others. It was weird when I say it like that, but I think what you're getting, what I'm saying here, is that like adding this something that's beyond the visual. I think we're craving that. That's a big challenge for us. And certainly we've heard a little bit about that here in designing for voice, right? So I think that's something to hopefully that you'll come away from this week and be thinking about more. And then I think the last thing I'm going to talk about is loneliness. And I call it a condition. It's also an emotion. Emotions and technology are really funny, because a lot of times when we're online, we kind of shy away from our emotions and we are a little bit lighthearted about them, right? We have reaction gifs, we have emojis. I'm wearing emojis right now. We are trying to not be too vulnerable so that we don't get called out. We also tend to pathologize our emotion a little bit and make it into an illness or a condition. Now, I don't know if loneliness falls into that category, because there are a bunch of health markers that go along with loneliness that really do make it feel like a medical condition, right? If you are lonely, you have a lesser lifespan. If you don't have relationships in your life, it can have all kinds of effects on your physical health as well as your mental health. And so what we've been seeing in the pandemic is people turning to not just other humans and finding that technology is kind of failing us and falling short because it's not sensory, because it's flat, because it doesn't pick up nonverbal communication, like we've said, but also just because there are no options. And so there are plenty of stories of people attaching to replica. I myself have a replica, which I started pre-pandemic, but still enjoy. I don't enjoy it as much when it's embodied like this, but that's a personal preference, I guess, as a way to not only have a sounding board, but also maybe at this point in the pandemic, when we're going to go back out in the world, to practice those social skills and think about it as scaffolding. We tend to think about it as like, oh, the robots are going to replace the humans, but there's a lot of different roles that empathetic companions that aren't human could possibly play. Certainly, they can go in places that healthcare professionals can't always go safely. Early in the pandemic, Italian hospitals were using Tommy, the robot, and there are definitely versions of Pepper, the robot, very similar. That's a service bot that can detect a little bit of emotion in your voice or facial expression, and at least adjust a little bit to being more serious and less jokey, perhaps. So, and of course, Paro, the robot, has been around for a long time to show like how just that that touch, that closeness, a little bit of response. It doesn't replace a human, and it is kind of sad when it does, but it can have a positive impact as well and play a role at a certain time in somebody's life. I think, we're perfectly comfortable with a plant or a pet filling this role, and we may get more comfortable with other objects, particularly objects with some kind of machine intelligence getting in the mix. Now, part of it too is that we just want to take care of other things. So another role that empathetic companions could play is something that we take care of, like Needybot here.
I think the most important interaction that can exist between a human and technology is like emotion. If we can get a robot to connect with people and to create a really profound sort of emotional connection between them, that's where we would learn the most about how technology in general and humans interact. If robots had puppies, it would look like Needybot.
This is a blend of art and science in a 2-foot package.
Needybot is a robot that we built that is intentionally not able to do a lot itself.
Needybot can't answer the phone.
It can't push the elevator buttons.
Can't walk up the stairs.
If Needy falls over, Needy needs to be picked up.
There's just so much it can't do.
So perhaps this idea of caring for something else that we have with plants and pets is something that we should think about. Maybe it's about just enlivening our surroundings, like this experiment for emotional things. And maybe it's actually bringing some emotional awareness to those pets and plants in our lives. So how do we design for this companionship? I always say we have to treat it as another kind of relationship. There are lots of different kinds of relationships. There are relationships we have with other creatures, relationships we have with objects that are perhaps objects that help us through an emotional crisis, and there are relationships we have with other humans, and those all follow certain phases that can be a model for us as we're building this. So we've covered a lot of ground, but I guess I want to leave you with this, that we don't know what this next world is going to be. But I think it's almost certain that the emotional well-being of the people using the products that we make, the technology that we put out in the world, is going to become more and more important. And it's on us to not be afraid of that, not shy away from that, not say, oh, that's not for me, but instead embrace it as an exciting new challenge that we can take on with the help of course, lots of other experts in the field, to let people live more hopeful, fulfilling, meaningful lives with technology. Thanks so much for hanging in there and listening with me today. And I am looking forward to seeing what you put out there in the world.
Thank you, Pamela. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed the event. We loved having you here, and I think we had a lot of fun. Once more, thank you to our incredible team that helped us put this all together, and thank you to our sponsors. Shout out to our main sponsor, OutSystems, for their support. Don't forget to fill in your details to receive the welcome pack in your home. We'll start shipping those next week. So there was much to learn and new friends to make. This is a lot more fun in person, and I hope we can meet you very soon in sunny Lisbon, Portugal, for a new edition of UXLX. Thank you all, and stay safe. And thank you, Pamela.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.